Welcome back to Black Talk today, and I'm your host, Troy. It is June 25th, 2021. Hope everyone finds themselves in a very safe space. In this particular podcast, I will be talking about the Derek Chauvin sentencing today, verdict that we received. It's been a verdict that we all have been waiting for. We've been holding our breath for some time. And he's received 22 and a half years for the killing of George Floyd. And it's I feel like it's a long overdue sentencing. For whatever reason, my mind, my spirit, I feel like we, as a nation, at least here in America, the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd situation has been a situation that the nation has been dealing with for over a decade, it feels like. And living through it and experiencing it and seeing how divided the country was in so many different facets of ways, and, whites and blacks and, police versus the citizens, etc. The loss of lives on both sides from, acts of violence being committed. It's a lose-lose, I think, for the nation, in the sense of, in all reality, no one wins. Here in America, we fall in love with violence, right? It's kind of been our calling card, and we've been proud of it. We've been proud to be known as the society that incarcerates a good portion of its citizens. And at the same time, we've also been proud of a society that has also, for the most part, disenfranchised a portion of its citizens for a very long time, for centuries, if I'm being honest and fair here. And while we've made steps in the right directions to correct a lot of these shortcomings, one can call them, without a doubt, we do still have a long way to go. We're not at home base. We're not at the finish line. And while we're still making strides in that direction, I think for the most part, I feel like the world stopped when George Floyd died. I think the world stopped and held its breath. And it was one of the most fascinating moments to be able to experience, to live at this time, because I've heard from my elders that when Martin Luther King died, when Malcolm X died, when those figureheads died in the black communities, it kind of felt like the world stopped. And hearing from the elders when they describe how they felt seeing the video of George Floyd pleading for his life, and seeing the reaction from the world, from the communities, it was another experience that they was very familiar with. And it was sad at the same time. But it was a very powerful moment in history. It's a very powerful moment in time. And the fact that we find ourselves here today with the sentencing that we received, in all reality, let's not kid ourselves here. Do we really feel that justice is served on the behalf of the victim, George Floyd? Is 22 and a half years adequate enough for the torture that George Floyd received for over 9 minutes? And In our reality, the phrase that all lives matter, do all lives really matter? In our reality, do all lives hold equal value and weight here in America? Because I would beg to differ and say that they don't. As much as I'm proud to be an American citizen, I have to be fair and honest here. And not that I'm saying it's just solely because that I'm a black man and that I've been pre-installed, some may believe, with these feelings to believe that there's always an injustice that have been levied against my group. But let's be real and honest here. If a cop was murdered and we had the recording of the murder and it was in the same exact way that George Floyd was murdered, do we really believe that the man that murdered that cop in the very same fashion that George Floyd was murdered in would receive 22 and a half years for murdering a police officer? We know that police officers are a protected group, protected, entity. If you murder a cop, your sentence is going to be a hell of a lot harsher than it would be if you actually murdered a normal citizen in the same fashion, in the same way. And the reason why I bring that up is to prove my point that all lives are not equal here in America. We are given titles. For a very long time in this country, your race was a reflection of your title. Your skin color, your pigmentation of your skin, most of the time, which solely dictates the type of justice that you would receive most of the time. And that's the unfortunate truth, but it is the truth. And as American citizens, we got to be able to come to grips with reality. We got to be able to come to grips with the truth and to let the truth be the truth. We don't have to be ashamed of that. We don't have to make excuses for the truth that exists here in this country and the barbaric things that we've done to each other here in this country, and the countless times where liberty and justice have turned the blind eyes to citizens within the walls of this country. It has favored, if we're going to speak honestly and truly, it has favored selective groups here. Justice has literally been selective when it was time to render its fate for the individual. And 9 out of 10, when it comes time to render justice against law enforcement, when they are clearly guilty, it's a fate that's not normally met by them in court. And that's not fair. And that's never been fair. So I've never gotten behind the all lives matter mantra, because all lives up until this particular point that I have seen by the actions of others in this nation has not technically really mattered. And that's the God honest truth. And people now in Minnesota today some are mourning, some are rejoicing. And that's your right to feel and respond in whatever way that you feel you need to. There's still 3 other officers that still need to be prosecuted, right, for the death of George Floyd, who were present, who did not aid him or intervene while Derek Chauvin murdered him, right? So we're still waiting for their sentencing. But if we're going to go by what Derek received today, you would think that their sentencing would be on similar bar guidelines of what he received. And I would expect something pretty much similar in that regard. But in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, they've just been taking a beating. That city is just exhausted. I mean, if it's not incident after incident after incident that occurs between citizen and law enforcement, I mean, I don't know when will it stop for them down there. Like, they don't get a break. And I get it. We do have police reform in the pipeline that's coming. And people are looking forward to that. And I will say this, there needs to be some form of reform. I will say that. While I'm against disbanding law enforcement, I'm totally against that. I would never sign up for that. I would never support that at all, ever. I would never agree on any legislation that would be anti-law enforcement. I just won't. They're too important of an entity in a community, in a nation, to just do without and to just disregard and just to throw away. But do we need reform to occur? Yes, I would say yes, we do need a sense of reform, and it goes far beyond just training. We need more than just training here. In some cases, we need empathy. We need to find a way to appeal to the empathy side within human beings again. And we need to figure out a way to figure out if the officers that we are hiring have that attribute in them. And it's not an attribute that you can turn off and turn on for selective people that you're policing. In some cases, that is the case. In most cases, it's not. Most cases, law enforcement do what they're supposed to do. Most cases, law enforcement are the quintessential example of honor, integrity, and respect. Again, I have not ever in my life experienced any kind of racism, any kind of prejudice, interaction between any kind of law enforcement official ever in my life. And I'm a black man, and I've been a black man for a very long time. I've encountered very friendly, firm, respectable cops of different creeds, backgrounds, religions, and they've treated me accordingly with respect, dignity, and integrity. Not to minimize anybody else's experience. Not to say that if someone has experienced anything other than what I have, it's invalid. Not at all. But those are my experiences. And as human beings, we pretty much are guided off of those experiences that we have. We pretty much predicate how we feel about anyone and everyone off of the experiences that we have with them. There's nothing new here. There's nothing wrong to say that, hey, you know what? All law enforcement are not bad, because they're not at the end of the day. But we got to be real here. In our reality, is this really justice for George Floyd? That's a fundamental question that I would like to pose. That's a fundamental question that I would like to ask. Is this really justice that's going to be substantially vindicated long term, as people think that it's going to be all across the nation? There's monuments, statues. George Floyd, many can say now, is becoming a martyr all across the nation. And well, let me not say all across the nation, but in very, affluent states, high profile states, New Jersey, New York, obviously Minneapolis. And let me be honest. Let me tell you guys how I feel about that, right? I understand if you build a George Floyd monument in, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he died at, where the incident occurred at. If you allow the city to rename the street where he died at, unfortunately, the George Floyd Way, I have no issue with that at all. That's where the incident occurred at. The people there, they're still going through it because it's where they live. And, the psychological ramifications and damage, the folks are still going through it. And to bring some form of calm to that city, to do that, I get it. I get why the city would allow that to be something that to be done. But all across the nation, I mean, especially in Jersey, like, I'm not here to tear down George Floyd. I'm not here to tear down the man at all. I'm not going to disparage his character. But I don't think we need to have a George Floyd monument in every city. That's just my personal opinion. I didn't know the dude prior to him being murdered. I didn't. I didn't know the guy. Right? I didn't. It's unfortunate that he died. It really is. He shouldn't have died. Right? But my thing is, we shouldn't be highlighting his life solely because, again, there's going to be another George Floyd. Just like there's going to be another Breonna Taylor, unfortunately. There's going to be another Mike Brown, unfortunately. It's inherently going to happen, right? This is the country that we live in. This is the nation that we're living in and governing of. So my thing is then, do we then build a statue for every person that's died unjustifiably by the hands of law enforcement? And then my thing is, what about the people that didn't die by the hands of law enforcement? What about the countless people that die in black communities, our highlight here, that die by the hands of other black people? What about young black children that are killed in senseless drive-by shootings or gang violence and squabbles? Do they not get a plaque on their street or block where they died at? Do they not get a monument at their playground? Do they not get a statue in remembrance of? My thing is it only because this is a publicized, high-profile murder? Do we really care? That's a fundamental question that I would like to ask the nation as a whole, but also I would also like to exclusively ask black people that as well. Do we really care as much as we say that we care? Not to say that we don't. Not that, and I don't want folks to get confused by that. Not to say that we just don't inherently care about each other. But is it because other people are putting the light on it and putting the interest that it's a bad thing that occurred to us, and that it's a act of travesty that occurred to George Floyd, that now we are showing the interest and the energy and the fortitude to say, hey, this shouldn't have happened? Honest and freely is a mantra that I coined. We should be able to speak honestly and freely here. And allow me to say this, and I mean this with no disrespect, but I don't think George Floyd's death is going to create the type of change that we think is going to change for decades to come for policing in America. I just don't think so. That's just my personal opinion, right? There's been, again, in the past, crimes just as heinous of the nature. Men, women, children murdered. Bills pass, laws pass, and they just don't stop. And I don't mean to sound cynical, but what makes me believe now that this crime occurred and now there's justice for the family in the sense of Derek Chauvin being sentenced to 22 and a half years, the monument's going up, there's a possible bill in the pipeline that the state legislators have to adhere and figure out whether Congress is going to pass the bill or not. I just don't have the utmost confidence in the fact that this is really going to be anything ground shaking that's really going to make a change that we think in the way that police reform could change the way police police the communities. And that leads me to this, right? Instead of having a George Floyd bill, right? Because according to this bill, right, in the legislation sheet, individuals would be allowed to recover damages in civil court when law enforcement officers violate their constitutional rights by eliminating qualified immunity, law enforcement officials. All right, that sounds good. They're not protected no longer, so you can literally sue them. You can sue them for everything they owe civilly, right? Banning chokeholds, no-knock warrants. Great. That can be a part of police reform, right? Mandate deadly force be used only as a last resort. That's another thing that could be mandated as police reform. My thing is, instead of passing this George Floyd bill, in which they're naming it as, why don't we just enforce the laws that are on the books? Why don't we just enforce the laws that are on the books? If I commit a crime of murder, what's the crime? What's the penalty? Okay? Murder, 30 years. Regardless of your race, regardless of your religion, regardless of your occupation. We're just going to enforce the laws as it is written. And I think if people would have just stopped and thought, and I get it, it's easy to say so now, right? I don't want to do the Monday morning quarterbacking, right? But this is just my personal opinion. Instead of looking to pass a legislative bill, because there's a lot of emotion at the moment, and there's a lot of people clamoring for power and just want to do anything in regard to this particular incident, just to put anything out there to say that they did something. Hey, let's just enforce the laws in the book. But okay, let's look at the laws. Let's open up the books. Derek Chauvin, you committed murder. Okay, this is the penalty for murder. Your occupation is irrelevant and does not protect you from being prosecuted to the full extent of the law, as if you was a regular, normal citizen. You being a police officer does not give you any kind of qualifying protection or consideration from being prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So therefore, look, if George Floyd committed the murder that you committed against him, he'll get 30 years, 40 years. Well, you're going to get 30 years or 40 years, sir. In the story, we close the book. Everybody go home. I say let's mainstream a lot of this. I think we can get ahead of a lot of these issues by just keeping things black and white. And some people might say, oh, things are not black and white. Things sometimes are gray. Hell, they can get a little bit red sometimes. I think keeping things stupid, dumb, keeping things very simplistic, sometimes is the best thing to do instead of trying to complicate things. Because the more you complicate things in nature, the less you get done. The less you're able to implement what you actually want to actually implement. And listen, there's a lot of bipartisanship that's going on within the Congress right now between Republicans and Democrat, right? You got that normal squabble between these two parties. And I'm hoping that, of course, they can come to some medium and meeting of the mind if they're going to then reconsider passing this bill, which they very much may do. But I'm not going to cross my fingers and cross my toes if they don't. I'm fine with that too. But again, why can't we just enforce the laws that are on the books? Because every killing then is going to then invoke the people going to then the legislators to say, hey, well, this person died today. John Doe died today. He was murdered by John Doe cop. So therefore, can we have a John Doe bill? Because the way John Doe cop murdered him was wrong, and John Doe, the victim, his life did matter, so therefore he needs to be validated, and this bill needs to live on forever to always remind people of what happened to John Doe. I just don't think you can sufficiently do that for every life. I don't think it makes sense. So my thing is, if we're not going to enforce the laws that are on the books for all American citizens to be governed by, and we're going to give certain groups, or let me not say groups, certain people protection to some degree, or more protection than others due to their occupation, then this is not a democracy we have here then. Then we're not doing what I thought we were doing here in this country. Right? I think that's a fundamental thing that we can consider. I mean, the House made plans to vote on this bill Wednesday night, but the vote had been slated to Thursday. Well, today's Friday. Still haven't heard anything from them yet. And what's even more crazy is that Capitol Police is warning Congress about possible security risks because they were waiting for the verdict to come out. Because there possibly could be another potential threat against the U.S. Capitol. It's getting out of control. I think this country has been obviously severely divided, right? Some folks feel like, unfortunately, George Floyd got what he deserved. He didn't cooperate with the police, and he was a drug user, so therefore Derek Chauvin didn't kill him, right? Some people literally feel that way. And on the other side of the aisle, some folks feel like Derek Chauvin literally killed George Floyd. He stopped him from breathing and asphyxiated him to the point where he couldn't breathe by continuously placing his knee on his neck and not allowing his diaphragm to expand so that he can breathe. So this is the climate that we're living in this country right now. And it's crazy but then again, the country is crazy. I'm really starting to believe that America has really turned into a huge mental asylum. We're questioning whether a man killed a man on video after the man is telling the officer that has his knee on his neck while he's handcuffed on the ground, subdued, not a threat, that he can't breathe. The man saying he can't breathe, we know what the consequences are to you not being able to breathe. And we're still questioning, well, did Derek Chauvin murder George Floyd? There's still people still questioning that. It just goes to show how far gone we are as a nation of rational thinking people. And if we're questioning that still, again, I think the nation has really gone crazy and has turned into a mental asylum. Everything that's normal, that I used to think that was normal when I was growing up or when I was coming into my sensibilities or senses to become an adult, everything is flipped on its head. Everything that I thought was normal or that's acceptable in society is no longer acceptable. Or everything that I thought isn't acceptable is now acceptable. You can't have an opinion about it. You can't question it. You can't say anything about it because you'll offend someone, so your opinion is invalidated. You can't speak freely. You can't speak openly and be assured of how you feel about anything now. And logic is even questioned. Like, logic used to be a thing that groups and masses of people were able to agree on because it was the general consensual logical thing that we could just agree on as human beings. Like, no, like the sun is up because it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The sun is up. That's why it's bright outside. But people debate you that it's 3 p.m. and it's bright outside, but the sun is not up. The moon is actually up. And then that'll be a debate and that'll be a conversation of topic. And this is the nation that we live in right now. So if Derek Chauvin received 10 years, not 22 and a half years, I wouldn't have been surprised. I wouldn't have been shocked. I wouldn't have been disappointed. I would have been, well, I would have felt like it's right on cue to the nation we're living in. Everything is upside down, unfortunately. Now, listen, Derek Chauvin is not going to serve 22 and a half years. He's going to serve maybe 15 years with good time. Good time served, right? So he serves 15 years, maybe 13 years, right? Depending on how they run a good time. We don't know, right? But let's say on a good day, he's going to serve 15 years. He gets out, he's 60 years old because he's 45 now. He goes back, lives the rest of his life. No one remembers him. He disappears. I don't believe today, as many people believe, was a day or opportunity to realize that it was a turning point here in this country. I don't think it was that fundamental and monumental enough to be considered that kind of day. Because again, what was the justice? A man is still dead and gone, right? He's not coming back. He's not going to be able to be a father to his daughters, to his children, his other children. His family members are going to miss him. He's not going to be able to be in existence with the living. Whereas another man will still somewhat have opportunity to live on the rest of his life. What's justice about that, right? But also the fact that this is the longest sentence that a police officer has ever been sentenced to in history in the state of Minnesota is even more appalling. But look what we had to go through as a nation to get this kind of justice. The city was damn near tore down, burned down all across the nation. Different cities was rioting, turning up. Even across the world, people that never known George Floyd, never even came to America, don't even speak English, are not even black, was showing support and disgust for what George Floyd experienced. This is where we at in the world as human beings. This is not a moment to celebrate. I've seen a lot of black folks out there celebrating like we won a Super Bowl, like we're getting reparations, like this is a win for black people. This is not a win for anyone. This is not even a win for the Floyd family. He should have never been killed. I don't know if folks understand that. And even the Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison, he says that the outcome of the Chauvin case is not enough. There needs to be a fundamental societal change, right, that we all need to have and experience as American people. right? We got to be honest with ourselves. Is this the nation that we want to continue to live in? Or do we want to create a different narrative and a different experience for ourselves currently and for our offspring in the future? That's a fundamental question we're going to have to come to reality with and come to grips with. Do we want to continue to allow justice not to reign supreme for everyone? Or we want Lady Liberty to continuously peek underneath her robe or her scarf that's covering her eyes and look every now and then to see who she's about to render justice for, and decide to be prejudiced on who's going to receive it or not? We got to ask that question. We got to ask that question. I'm just saying, there's people that are doing 15 years for victimless crimes, guys. There's people doing 15 years for drug possession crimes, guys. You understand what I'm saying? I don't know if folks understand this. There's people doing 20 years for non-violent crimes, guys. There's guys that are still in jail right now from the 80s who are incarcerated for selling drugs. This man killed a man, took a life, and he's only going to serve 15 years. Now, if you want to know my personal opinion about the matter, I feel like he should have gotten a maximum sentence. I would have recommended life, right? You took a life. I feel like what he did was premeditated. So since it was premeditated, you took a life, you have your life taken. That's justice. That's fair and balanced. To me, though, and maybe to many others, right? Maybe to many others, right? That's fair and balanced. If you take take an individual life unjustifiably, then you know what? You ought to have your life taken too. It shouldn't be that much of a debate. We shouldn't need to have jurors debating for 2 weeks to figure out what the outcome should be for an individual like that, right? It should kind of be, again, swift, straightforward, to the point, and that's it. But it's not, right? I mean, Derek Chauvin technically faced up to 40 years in prison. He faced up to 25 years for third-degree murder. For third-degree murder alone, he was facing up to 25 years for just that murder. He faced up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, guys. And he faced up to 10 years for manslaughter. So if you ask me, Derek Chauvin, in all reality, got off the hook. You know, like if you ever gone fishing and you put your best bait on your hook and you cast it out with your rod, and it sinks to the bottom with that anchor on it, and you're trying to catch that tuna or that bass, and you feel it nibble, and you're like, oh, I'm on to something now. And then it takes. And then it just starts to wheel off that. Man, there's nothing like that feeling, right? There's nothing like when that rod starts spinning and that fishing line starts spinning. Oh, you got something now. And then you start to put a little bit of tension on that line and you start to put a little resistance. Like, come on back, buddy. And next thing you know, you don't feel anything. And you ask yourself, hold on. I just felt this thing. It was pulling just now. I just put a little bit of tension on it. And you second guess yourself. You're like, nah, it still got to be there. It still got to be there. So you still putting a little tension on, but you don't feel anything on the opposite end. And then you come to the realization, like, that thing done got off the hook. Took the bait, got off the hook. Listen, you can have your opinion and how you feel about the sentencing, whether you feel it was justified with the 22 and a half years or whether you feel he shouldn't have gotten that. I'm going to tell you how I feel. Derek Chauvin got off the hook. Derek Chauvin got off the hook, guys. The man was facing 75 years, guys. If he would have been sentenced to the full extent of the law for the second-degree murder, for the third-degree murder, and for manslaughter, folks, that's 75 years. If they were to prosecute him to the full extent of all of those charges now, what's the likelihood of that is very slim, right? He's a cop, right? So you're going to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. So that played a large role in that. It's a high-profile crime, right? So to go from 75 years down to 15, which he will likely serve in a maximum security prison. Come on. He's not going to be in general population. He's going to be in protective custody, guys, for 15 years. Derek Chauvin got off. Family still be able to visit him, still be able to get his phone calls, still be able to get commissary, still be able to have a TV in his room, Listen, take it from me. I've worked in a prison. I know the amenities. I know what they can have. I know what they can't have. I know what some have. I know the privilege that others don't have. Derek Chauvin got off. And you know who knows it? America. Anyway, guys, this is Black Talk Today. I'm Troy. I'm your host. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please don't forget to follow me on YouTube at Black Talk Today. I appreciate that. Follow me also on Twitter at Black Talk Today. It's much appreciated. I'll catch you guys next time. And remember, you ever heard of something? First Amendment. Don't forget it. Protect mine. I protect yours. Peace.